broadcasting from the studios of AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota, and airing on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk. Welcome to The Gailey Show, the only daily LGBTQ progressive radio news and talk show in the United States. I'm your host, John Parker. Today is our weekly Thinking Clearly, Thinking Queerly episode, where we sit down with a guest for the hour to help us think more clearly and more queerly about the major issues of the day facing the LGBTQ and allied community. We know that there is a lot of news going on right now, both breaking and ongoing coverage. And so you can get the best of that coverage coming up next on WCPT 820. It's with Chu's Views with Richard Chu, and on AM 950 KTNF, it is the Matt McNeil Show. They will catch you up to date on all of the stuff that is happening right now. We like to take this time to reflect and to dive into a particular topic. And today's topic in particular is a big one. We're talking about Christian nationalism. My guest is Kat Grant. Kat served as an Equal Justice Works Fellow at the Freedom from Religion Foundation, where they worked on legislative and regulatory advocacy projects, public legal education, and federal amicus briefs. Kat is a contributing writer for Freethought Now and author of the blog Transing Boundaries, analyzing the intersections of law, religion, politics, and queerness. Kat graduated from Indiana University Maurer School of Law, and while in law school, they served as a director for the LGBTQ+ project at that School of Law, student chair of the National Lawyers Guild Disability Justice Committee, and was involved in Outlaw, O-U-T, all in caps there. Hello, Kat. Welcome to The Gailey Show.
Hello. Happy to be here.
All right. We've only got an hour to unpack a lot of this. So let's start with Christian nationalism. How should our listeners be defining it? Because I think there are a lot of different ways. There's like the moral majority that folks may remember from way back when. And then there's the whole evangelical, conservative, or what was that, compassionate Christian movement under George W. Bush. So how should our listeners be thinking about Christian nationalism and what it is?
Yeah, so there are a bunch of different definitions of Christian nationalism. It has been a major area of academic study, especially increasing in the past few years. I know one of the really popular definitions comes from Perry and Whitehead. But in short, it is essentially an ideology that basically means that Christian identity and national identity, in the U.S. case, American identity, are the same thing. In order to be American, you have to be Christian. And in particular, you have to be a very, very specific type of Christian. You have to be a very specific type of conservative, usually evangelical, sometimes fundamentalist. There are some interesting nuances with Catholicism there. But, you know, this very hyper-conservative, racist, nationalistic, misogynistic, homophobic, very particular theology that very much focuses on power within, Christianity being the power of the state and enforcing that on everyone else, regardless of their own beliefs.
Can you unpack for us something that was really big there, this version of Christianity? Because there are a lot of different, like here in Minnesota, we have some pro-LGBTQ churches, and in Chicago as well. So help us unpack which of the denominations are the most Christian nationalists and therefore the most problematic.
Yeah, so I don't think that breaking it down into denominations is particularly helpful, because even within denominations, you can have a really wide variety of Christian nationalism. You can see Methodist churches, for example, that are often very progressive, and you can also find very heavily Christian nationalist influenced Methodist churches. Same with Baptists, same with Catholics. It's very, very difficult to try and break it down into individual denomination. Instead, there are common factors, and there are some churches that are more likely to be engaged in Christian nationalism than others. Again, very conservative evangelicism, fundamentalist Christianity, which there's a difference between evangelicism and fundamentalism. Those are things that tend to get conflated quite a bit, but they're actually two different but interrelated entities. Usually what you will see in these churches, though, is a big emphasis on American patriotism and American identity within worship. That is a huge major focus, along with this very strong persecution complex. So these are the churches where you are going to see pastors coming up and being like, the transes are violating our rights, and woke DEIs, anti-Christian bias. One of the it's kind of ironic to call it a red flag, but there's been this very interesting movement in the past few years of churches that are not Christian nationalist churches that are trying to get away from Christian nationalism and like disassociate themselves from that, is the removal of the American flag from the sanctuary. This was actually something very interesting. My uncle is I believe, Disciples of Christ pastor, and he got in a huge fight with his congregation over removing the American flag from his sanctuary. So, there are all of these signals that get very much wrapped up in, this kind of post 9/11, very jingoistic American identity. And that's really how you can start identifying those churches, more so than trying to line it up with a particular denomination.
That is fascinating and something I did not know. And I'm now recalling from the churches that I grew up in also had American flags in there. And I'm now starting to wonder, like, why was there an American flag even to begin with?
Yeah, it's one of those things, it dates back to the Red Scare. Like most things in this country, it's either the Red Scare or it's Reagan or it's slavery. It's one of the big three, or it's any of the above. So that dates back to the Cold War, the Red Scare, saying we Americans are not like these godless commies. We're going to put the American flag in our church sanctuaries. That's the same with adding one nation under God to the Pledge of Allegiance. All of that history is very, very recent. And then sort of kind of in about the past 5-ish years, that's when churches have kind of been reevaluating. There was a big push to do it again after 9/11, because of course there was. But in about the past 5 years, I would say there's been a big push to remove the American flag from church sanctuaries in progressive churches.
I did not know that. We are talking with attorney and writer Kat Grant, who is an expert on Christian nationalism, which is our topic that we're diving into today. What are their goals?
Their goals are somehow both very well defined and kind of not at all, in my experience. When I say well defined, I mean, you can go look at the Heritage Foundation, which has been a huge part of the moral majority for a long time, has put out this thing called Project 2025, which I'm sure most people have heard something about Project 2025 at this point. And the thing about Project 2025 is it's called that, but it's existed in various forms for basically as long as the Heritage Foundation has existed. It is their list of goals for, that they would want to see from the next conservative president. President Trump is kind of the first president to really like jump all on board on it. So, number one,
despite lying in the campaign and saying
correct,
he had absolutely nothing to do with it, and that no one from whoever created it, he was like, I have nothing to do with it. I don't know anything about it. And anyone that did anything with it is not going to be in my administration. And then literally on November 6th, it was, we're doing all of it. Sorry.
No, you're totally fine. So, a lot of what's in Project 2025 is about restricting bodily autonomy and reproductive rights, access to gender-affirming care. There's a lot about censorship in schools and reinstituting, prayer in schools, a Christian curriculum, all of these 10 Commandments bills you see going on across the country where schools are being mandated to put the 10 Commandments in every classroom. That's a part of Project 2025. Their idea is eliminate anyone who does not ascribe and fit within our particular theology. And they either need to be put in prisons or institutionalized, or they need to be forcibly converted into our way of life. Now, where it gets into what are their goals at all, it kind of gets into a leopards eating faces situation where they have all of these goals, but within all of these different groups in the Christian Nationalist Project, they have different understandings and different meanings of this goal. And we're already starting to see this take place in the conflicts between the Catholic Church in the United States and the Trump administration when it comes to things like immigration and healthcare access and poverty issues. So, that's where it's like they are only unified in the things that they hate, the things that they actually want to do. They are not unified on whatsoever. It's only the things they want to get rid of.
So you're talking about the Catholic Church there, and I've read some, and maybe this is a tangent, and don't go down this. But you're talking about the Catholic Church, and I've read some really interesting reporting on the new American Pope, one of which was from some, I believe it was a Dutch newspaper that was saying he wasn't on the radar, but the church had been losing a lot of money from American donors, American Catholics who were not sufficiently happy with the wrong direction they thought that the church was going in. So they stopped giving money. And so they wanted an American Pope to get more money because they had like an $80 million shortfall last year. I know it's too soon because I think the Pope was it in April or March, earlier this year.
Yeah, it was right after Easter.
Do Christian nationalists and Rome, are they on a weird synergy? Because there have been Catholic churches that have been like
on some topics.
Yeah, okay.
On some topics. So the thing about the Catholic Church is that there are a lot of moments that they really hard diverge from this movement. Again, thinking about poverty, thinking about the environment, climate change is a huge sticking point in between these groups. That is very much a divergence. And then there's just the fact that
I asked a huge question, and now I've got a break that I'm coming up on, and I want to give more time to that.
We can get back to it.
We're going to put a pin on it. We are going to take that break. We're going to have more with Kat Grant after this. Before we take that break, I want to share about our travel partner, Travel Marquette. And the reason why, for folks who have been listening now, you know that Marquette, Michigan, and Marquette County has become a very special place for me. I've been going there every year for 10 years now. And part of the reason why I love it is I don't have to worry about being queer while traveling there. It is a university town, super blue city, reliably blue county, with a very active pride organization and an absolutely delightful pride celebration in the middle of June that you should absolutely attend. But Marquette has so many things that I need when I want a long weekend getaway. Good restaurants, excellent bookstores, relaxing hiking, time out in nature, delicious bakeries. And I'm really grateful to be in partnership with Travel Marquette because the world sucks right now. And it's been so nice to just get in the car and drive to a place where I can be myself, relax, eat good food, buy what some people say is too many books, but I mean, come on, really, there cannot be enough. And to spend time resetting and refilling my cup in nature. If that is something that you would like to do, you can visit travelmarquette.com to start your journey. Travelmarquette.com. You are listening to The Gailey Show. We're going to be right back. Welcome back to The Gailey Show. I am John Parker. We are coming up on the bottom of the hour. This is our weekly Thinking Clearly, Thinking Queerly episode where we sit down with a guest for the episode to take a deep dive into an issue facing the LGBTQ and allied community. Today we're talking about Christian nationalism, something we've been getting a lot of calls and direct messages about on the Blue Sky. Always feel free to reach out to us on Blue Sky and DM us to let us know questions that you are asking about, because there are probably things we're asking about as well, and finding expert guests like today's attorney and writer Kat Grant. We're talking about their main area, or one of their main area, actually, of areas of expertise, Christian nationalism. Kat, before the break, before I rudely interrupted you, you were talking about the areas of convergence and divergence between the Catholic Church, so Rome, and then the American Catholic churches. Do you want to pick it up there?
Yeah, so really what I think the biggest thing to keep in mind is that the Catholic Church, despite having the Vatican, is not a monolith. Even within the hierarchy, you see, and this has been a major issue when we talk about Christian nationalism in the United States and the role of Catholicism. You know, the Vatican, Pope Francis and now Pope Leo have both been pushing pretty heavily in terms of what they are known to do against this kind of nationalist identity, against this very form of divisive politics. Meanwhile, the kind of governing body of the Catholic Church in the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, they have been one of these very heavily conservative, very much pushing to align with the Christian nationalist movement in the United States. And even within that, there is some nuance. You know, there are bishops that have pushed very, very heavily against a lot of what the Trump administration has been doing, a lot of what the Christian nationalist movement has been pushing. They have pushed very heavily against cuts to Medicare and Medicaid, very heavily against, ICE enforcement throughout various different areas. This whole idea that churches are no longer sanctuary spaces for immigrants that are considered sensitive and therefore kind of off limits for immigration enforcement. So, there is divergence there, but the Vatican, and especially with our past two popes, has started in many ways to push back against that. Now, where they very much align is on gender politics, where they very much align is on queerness, birth control, reproductive autonomy. That's where the alignment is really happening. And that's how these groups came into alignment in the first place. Abortion is really a key factor and a key issue here. Abortion was not a Protestant concern in the United States until after Roe v. Wade. There is very interesting documentation from the Southern Baptist Convention's national meeting from the year that Roe v. Wade was decided, where they celebrated the decision of Roe v. Wade. Abortion became a proxy issue for American Protestants because it was the thing that they could latch on to politically for power when it was no longer mainstream acceptable to support segregation, when they could no longer push these segregation academies, when they could no longer push for this. They put their bucket in with abortion. And Catholics in the United States, who have a very interesting political history, Catholics, despite being a majority in a lot of the world, are still very much a minority in the United States. And so Catholics started teaming up with Protestants really, for one of the first times. This was the era in which this kind of concept of Catholics can't be real Americans, Catholics are too loyal to the Pope to be loyal to the United States. That narrative started shifting. Now, that narrative still very much exists in the United States, but that's where that shift happened, because Catholics got access to political power because Protestants picked up on abortion as a proxy issue. And now we are seeing this same pattern. And I've been doing some research actually on how gender affirming care and trans rights are not only following the same pattern, but are conceptually the same issue as abortion. What it really comes down to politically and theologically is both the idea that we should not be controlled by any one church's or any group of churches' understanding of gender, understanding of when life starts, understanding of what someone can and cannot do with their body. And, this is very much tied up in what women can and cannot do with their bodies. This idea that women are very, very vulnerable. A lot of this comes back to in the 1970s and 80s, Pope John Paul II gave a series of talks that became known as the theology of the body. And this is the idea that, sex is a sacred thing that occurs between a married man and a married woman, and it should only be, heterosexual monogamous couples for the purpose of procreation, and that is the basis of human dignity in a sexual context. And so this idea is what then gets turned into, transitioning is against your holy design from God. Transitioning is, ignoring the sacred dignity of your body. This idea of removing healthy body parts, you also see as an argument against hysterectomies. You see it as an argument against gender affirming care. So it's all spun together in this access to political power that has really hurt women overall for decades. And it's now very, very much, trans people are the boogeyman of the Christian nationalist movement right now. You've seen it in the aftermath of the Charlie Kirk shooting, where they basically ran around, and I'm using reporters with very strong air quotes here, basically went and tried to track down every single person that the alleged shooter knew, and went, do you know any trans people? And they found very thin, not substantiated evidence, again with huge air quotes, because I believe it's based off of a single TikTok of his roommate using an anime filter to make him look like an anime girl, to say his roommate was trans, they were in a relationship, that's why he did it. They were looking for any reason to blame trans people for this shooting. And as Charlie Kirk has become the martyr of the Christian nationalist movement, a lot of us in the field were sitting and watching it and waiting to see how they were going to blame trans people. This fixation on trans people has become a really clear hallmark of the Christian nationalist movement, because every fascist movement needs a scapegoat.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it was the trans ideology on the bullet casings that they planted in the Wall Street Journal, and the Wall Street Journal has that article, I believe, still up with a correction.
Yeah.
The article is still up there. Then weirdly on the talk shows on Sunday, the governor of Utah, Governor Cox, was like, "Oh yes, there's trans stuff involved and there's leftist ideology involved. What's the evidence? Oh, and we can't talk about that." So they're putting it out there, and it's so irresponsible. But they are using the investigation to frame a particular narrative, which is very, very disturbing, and it's just going to take all of this to the next level, which is why I wanted to have you on here to talk about how they are functioning, and it's really interesting to hear how that shift happened between segregation to abortion and now to trans rights. It's just
like I said, most things in the United States, most of our issues in the United States can be traced back to some combination of slavery, the Cold War, and Ronald Reagan.
Our original sin. All right, we're going to have more with Kat Grant when we come back, attorney and writer who is an expert on Christian nationalism. You are listening to The Gailey Show on AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota, and WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk. Coming to you from the studios of AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota, and airing on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk, where facts matter. Welcome back to The Gailey Show. I'm John Parker. It is 33 minutes after the hour. It's our weekly Thinking Clearly, Thinking Queerly episode, where we sit down with a guest for the episode to help us think more clearly and more queerly on the major issues of the day facing the LGBTQ and allied community. As a reminder, yes, there's a lot happening right now with the news, and you're going to get all the updates on them. What coming up next on WCPT 820, Choose Views with Richard Chu and the Matt McNeil Show on AM 950 KTNF. We like taking a step back once a week to really process a particular issue. And this one is more relevant than ever since the murder of Charlie Kirk, which is Christian nationalism, and how MAGA and the far right are advancing it on all fronts. My guest today is Kat Grant. Kat served as an Equal Justice Works Fellow at the Freedom from Religion Foundation, where they worked on legislative and regulatory advocacy projects, public legal education, and federal amicus briefs. Kat is a contributing writer for Freethought Now and author of the blog Transing Boundaries, analyzing the intersections of law, religion, politics, and queerness. Kat, I have made an argument on this show that you're the expert on it, so you're going to tell me if I'm right or wrong, that the Trump administration isn't trying to establish Christian nationalism because MAGA has already established Christian nationalism in the U.S., given that the majority of U.S. states, many federal judges, the current Congress, and the current presidential administration 2.0, as well as, let's be frank, the Supreme Court, are using their interpretation of biblical law as the basis for legislation and policies, or twisting the law to fit their alignment with biblical law. My proposition then is that it's here, and it's a question of how far they will go. You're the expert, though. Prove me wrong.
I wish I could prove you wrong, but it's one of those things that it's hard to balance, where you want to communicate how dire the situation is, that we are not trying to prevent theocracy. Theocracy is here. Theocracy has been here for a long time. We are just really seeing the fever pitch and the worst version of it. We are seeing it really morph into, okay, we are reaching fascism, if we have not already reached full tilt fascism. And that's a very scary thing to say. And that's a very scary thing to communicate publicly. Because when people hear that, they start thinking there is no hope. There is no rolling it back. And you get into this kind of apathy trap. Now, that being said, there is hope. There are ways to roll it back. There are ways to fight back. There are people doing really, really incredible work throughout all of this, but it is very, very difficult work. You know, it looks like going into the places that progressives tend to forget matter and tend to forget exist. You know, there's this kind of mindset amongst a lot of progressives that, like, we shouldn't even bother fighting in red states. We shouldn't even, you know, I'm from Indiana. I'm from one of the statistically most conservative counties in Indiana, had like per capita the highest number of Trump voters in 2016 in that county in Indiana. And there are still progressives there. There is still a Democratic Party there. The next county over just had a major Pride festival, you know, despite like it almost getting shut down and the ACLU having to get involved. So, you know, there is work to be done in red states. There are people in those states that understand those issues and, you know, understand how to talk to people and engage in their communities, that they don't need blue state progressives swooping in and trying to save them, but they do need our support. And I think that that's a really important factor when we're talking about, okay, is Christian nationalism here? Is fascism here? Yes, it is. It is very much in progress. I might be taking a risk politically saying this publicly, but the Supreme Court has completely delegitimized itself. It has fallen into this trap of Christian nationalism. It has been packed with highly conservative judges that lied in their confirmation hearings and are now doing whatever they want as an institution. And I give a lot of love to our lovely, you know, 3 liberal women who are doing their best on the court. But, you know, when it's a majority thing of, you know, we've got a group of 9 wizards on a hill making decisions for all of us, the 3 of them can only do so much. So I do think it's here. I think we see it in a lot of our interpretations of the law that we're seeing coming down. Now, I will say, one of the heartening things is that at some of the lower levels, you know, at the circuit and district court levels on the federal level and at the state level, we see a lot of judges that are very mad about the situation that is happening. They are very mad about the disrespect that they have received from the federal government. I think anyone who has been to law school knows that rule number 1 is you don't get the judge angry at you. You do not disrespect the judge. That's going to be a problem. And that's why you see judges in places like Alabama and Arkansas ruling in favor of gender affirming care, because they are looking at this and they're saying, wait a minute, the witnesses being brought in, the expert witnesses are being recruited by these Christian nationalist organizations. You know, the Alliance Defending Freedom has this whole network of expert witnesses, quote unquote, most of whom have never provided gender affirming care, that go in and act in these cases. So there are judges that are pushing back. There are legislators that are pushing back. The Congressional Freethought Caucus has done a lot of really incredible work on pushing back, and they are growing incredibly rapidly. So, you know, there is fight, there is pushback. One of the things that I have very much been encouraging is for people to get involved in the legislative process now. You know, this is something that I've talked about with same-sex marriage in particular, where we have over-relied on the Supreme Court for civil rights. And we've not codified these rights in a lot of states, and we cannot trust Congress to codify certain rights. So what people need to be doing now, regardless of how safe they think their state is they need to go and look, because most states do not have same-sex marriage on the books. And in fact, a lot of states have bans on same-sex marriage on the books. Is they need to be going to their state legislators now and getting it on the books so that if Obergefell is overturned, which I think there is a moderate to strong likelihood that it will be overturned, whether it's this upcoming Kim Davis case or another case is yet to be known, those rights will still be protected and access to marriage will still be protected in your state. And I think that's the fight right now, is we have to push the fight. You know, the federal government, the courts have said, states' rights. All right, let's play ball. We'll go take it into the states. We will go into the legislators. We will lobby. We will make sure that our voices are heard. That is going to be the way to fight it. That is, if we are going to talk about how do we engage in a peaceful democratic process, if we talk about how do we avoid political violence, that is how we do it. And it takes everybody getting involved. Getting involved in the legislative process seems very scary if you're not an expert, but it's a phone call. It's an email. It is, if you don't know what's going on in your particular district, go look at organizations that support causes that you support. The Freedom from Religion Foundation has an entire action fund that puts out action alerts on pieces of legislation impacting, Christian nationalist issues. Groups like Catholics for Choice put out things on reproductive rights and bodily autonomy. All of these different organizations can kind of help point you in that direction. And the nice thing about working with state level legislators is that nobody talks to them. So if you go talk to them, A, you're probably going to get through to them. You're not necessarily going to get just an aid, but you're going to be able to go and talk to them. And that is how we are going to roll this back. That is how we are going to make sure that Christian nationalism can't go any further than it already has.
I'm here with attorney and writer Kat Grant, who is an expert on Christian nationalism. Something that I've been wondering about the blue dots in red states is, well, maybe be a blue dot in the Republican Party, because people don't vote in primaries. And if a whole bunch of Democrats suddenly showed up, registered as Republicans, and voted in those primaries, there'd be a really different, I think, number of candidates suddenly being on the ballot as Republicans.
This is what my dad does. My dad very much does this, especially if you are in a very red district where if you are really looking at like your local level, and that's the other thing, look at your local elections, look at your school boards, look at your library boards, look at your city and county councils, because a lot of this is happening at this very local level. A lot of times in red districts, there will not be a Democrat running in the primary, but there will be multiple Republicans. And so that's very much what my dad does. My dad actually for the past several primaries has only pulled Republican ballots. Because he's like, there's no one to vote for on the local level on the Democratic ticket. And so he's like, I'm going to try and like pick the person locally that is the best option. He also just wants to say he voted against Trump in every possible opportunity he had. But yes, this is very much the Mike Grant strategy of electoral politics is, look around you. If you are in a very red space, like obviously you should also maybe try and organize people to run. It's not hard to run for a local election. It is really just a matter of people.
That is something that still perpetually perplexes me, is the number of folks on our side. So I'm going to say like centrist, center-left, liberal, progressive, and so forth, don't want to be on school boards. They're waiting for somebody else to do it. They don't want to be on the county commission. Yep. They're waiting for somebody else to do it. They'll donate money. They'll do social media posts. They'll tell their friends. They'll help get out the vote, but they don't want to do it. And on the right, it seems like they're all clamoring to be on a school board, to be on a county commission, to be on a township board. And it's like, how do you reclaim those sites of power if you're not going to be willing to be in a site of power? And already, if you are a progressive or a liberal, you're already 1,000% more qualified than whatever Republican or MAGA is there, and I'm glad that you're bringing that up about there are resources that you can tap into. If you're like, well, I don't know all of the issues, there are resources and organizations available to you that can help you understand those issues and give you real scientific data to vote correctly and vote informedly. That's not a word, but to be informed in how you're voting as a county commissioner or a public school board member. Well, you proved me right, so I guess we're done here. No, I'm joking. Another thing that is very clearly, I don't know what to do about. No, I do know what to do about it, but I'm curious. Vaccines and health. Is this a Christian nationalism project, or is this just the bleep, bleep, bleep of the RFK Jr., who is just, clearly the worm ate everything in his brain? Like, are they just merging? Like, what is the deal with vaccines and healthcare? And is that a Christian nationalist thing?
It is definitely becoming a Christian nationalist thing. It is definitely a huge part of this, kind of idea. I think a lot of everyday people got sucked into the alt-right pipeline, got sucked into the Christian nationalist pipeline during the height of quarantine during 2020, when they were just on their phones scrolling through TikTok, and the algorithm kept feeding them all of this stuff. It is very easy, as someone who is, the internet identifies as a woman, even though I'm not a woman, to get sucked into the trad wife pipeline, especially as someone who is a little woo-woo, who is a little, I love antibiotics and vaccines. I also love turmeric milk when I have a sore throat, and, smoke cleanse my apartment from time to time. It is very easy to get sucked into those pipelines, but I do think it is very much related to Christian nationalism. It is the deregulation campaign. It is this idea that government regulation is a bad thing, that it is intrusive. And government regulation is always such a weird thing to me on the right, where they're always talking about how it's bad and evil until it's the things that they want. But, it is a huge part of this process is invoking fear in traditional, mainstream institutions. There is this idea that, this has always kind of been a thing when it comes to vaccines, where, there's the whole mark of the beast, rapture theology, and a lot of evangelical and fundamentalist theology, where it's like, if you get XYZ vaccine, and it's always been just whatever the new vaccine is, that's the mark of the beast, and then you're not going to get beamed up to heaven.
I have to fit in a break here. We're going to have more with Kat Grant, expert on Christian nationalism, when we come back. You're listening to The Gailey Show. More with us. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Gailey Show. I am John Parker. We are already coming up on the top of the hour. My guest today is attorney and writer Kat Grant, who is an expert on Christian nationalism. I think to close out the hour, because we were talking about people running for things, and it's going to perpetually baffle me, and I'm going to keep talking about it every time I can get folks who are listening. Get on a school board, get on a township board, get on a nonprofit board, get on something, run for something. But let's talk about, from your perspective, things that we could do. Maybe the Democratic Party, the progressives within the Democratic Party, the caucus that you were talking about. Should the next White House have a faith council?
No.
Great. Should Well, no, because I think it blurs and it validates the idea that there should be the White House involved in faith. And there's this really interesting argument happening on Blue Sky right now that is triggering, and also I want to get involved with. And so far, I'm just sort of sitting on the sidelines of progressive, liberal people of faith who are chastising us for wanting to have, us meaning folks who want to have, a very strict desegregation, if you will, between faith and the federal government and state government, basically, where they're like, if you do that, you're not going to be bringing along people of faith, and you're ostracizing them. And I'm like, but how do we get to a point where we have that again? How can we get to a point where I don't have to worry about what a Christian thinks about what I talk to about my doctor, right? Or what curriculum I have access to as a kid in school. So another thing that should we support any Democratic candidate that isn't willing to reform and pack the court on day one, the Supreme Court?
It's hard to say on any one issue. I don't think we should limit ourselves to being single issue support. Now, there are major issues that, if a candidate won't, vocally and validly support certain things, I probably will steer away. But, I think that the smart thing to do would be Supreme Court reform. That is the smart strategy for the Democratic Party to take on. The same way that I think the smart strategy is to take a pro-trans stance, I think the smart strategy is to take an anti-genocide stance. Now, the Democratic Party doing the smart thing, we'll see. It's statistically unlikely. This is something that has been a major point of frustration for me, and I think for a lot of progressives, where we watch the mainstream Democratic Party and the institutions that be constantly fumble the ball. You know, for a lot of us, I think the strategy seems very clear and very easy. And there is this catering to a mythical center in the United States that doesn't exist, that is pushing the Democratic Party further right as the Overton window shifts further right, which the Overton window, for those who may not know, is a term in political science where there is this window of acceptability in politics, where the further an extreme is on either side, you know, the more you see, for example, this MAGA, hard right, Groyper Army, Nick Fuentes, Charlie Kirk type of stuff become more and more prominent and more mainstream, things that are further on the right then start to seem more legitimate, start to seem more moderate. And in the United States, there has not been a true centrist party. I would argue in terms of mainstream Democratic politics, there has not been a true progressive politic in the United States for a very, very long time. And so, you know, there is this trying to cater to a further shifting right Overton window when really the smart thing to do is to go further left. So I do think court packing is a big part of that.
I mean, the thing that why that's such a huge issue for me is that I'm like, they have so effectively, everyone on the right, they have their federal judges, they have their attorney generals, they have this pipeline that they've established very well to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has gone off the rails. I don't even think
we need to start playing their game.
Well, yeah, but for me, I'm like, if you don't pack that court, that pipeline they have created is just going to continue to stymie you. Even if you have Congress, they have that court, and that court is willing to do anything at this point. I mean, anything.
Yeah, so I think there's a respectability politics angle there. I think there is this idea in a lot of progressive spaces that, you know, when they go low, we go high. But sometimes you have to use the same tactics. Sometimes you have to play their ball game, and their ball game is, you know, packing the courts. And you have to do it on all levels. It cannot just be the Supreme Court. You know, you look at things like Judge Kaczmarek in the Fifth Circuit in Texas, who is a nightmare judge. He pops up like a terrible jack-in-the-box in my newsfeed all the time. So you have to look at the entire pipeline. It frankly also starts at law school recruitment. It starts with looking at the Federalist Society. It starts at looking at who gets clerkships. You know, there is this whole institution and this whole system that has to be reformed, and we have to be more aggressive about it instead of playing the la-di-da, everything was fine until they started doing bad things, because the bad things started when they built the system.
To come back to your point about the Overton window, I get so frustrated when folks are, you know, will sit there and look at Bernie Sanders or Zohran Mamdani or AOC and go, they're the far left. And I just want to scream, because I'm like, I'm a dual citizen of France and the US, and what you think is the far left is just centrist in Europe and in other, you know, in other countries, in Australia, in New Zealand. Like it's so, we have been so dragged to the right that we don't even realize that that stuff is so like centrist.
Yeah.
When they sit there and criticize, and Hakeem Jeffries is like, I'm not endorsing Zohran Mamdani, I'll do it whenever I decide to do it. I'm like, do you realize democratic socialism was the president who was president for 4 terms? Like, FDR was a democratic socialist. You're running away from your history. Speaking of running away, I'm out of time. So, Kat, this has been such a lovely conversation. We're clearly going to have you come back here, because I feel like we've just only started to discuss this issue. So tell us how we can
happy to come back anytime. Yeah, you can find me in a few places. I am at Kat Dean, KatDene, on Blue Sky. I am at Chuckle Lemon on TikTok. I also talk about a lot of this stuff on TikTok. You can find my writing over on Freethought Now, over at the Freedom from Religion Foundation. I write about twice a month over there. And you can also find my independent work over at transingboundaries.com, where I write about a whole bunch of stuff.
Perfect. Well, thank you. We're going to see you again soon. Folks, up next on WCPT 820 is Chew's Views with Richard Chew. On AM 950, it's the Matt McNeil Show. Stay tuned after that for Native Roots Radio, and then step into the unknown with Greg Bakken on Ghost Box Radio. And until tomorrow, keep it queer, America.